Hey everybody, my name is Paul Eston Jr., aka Boy Green. I'm the New York Jets digital reporter for Heavy.com, and we got a very special series we're starting here. It's going to be called Meet the Fleet. We're going to be introducing you guys to all of the Jets rookies that are coming in, both in the first, second, third, fourth, and all the way through the seventh round. And for that, we're going to learn a little bit more about each of them by bringing in an insider from wherever they came from to learn more about them. And well, to kick this off, we're going to be speaking with a very special guest. His name is Dan Hope. He's the deputy editor and lead Ohio State football beat writer for 11 Warriors. And let's bring him in. Dan, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start, of course, with Garrett Wilson, the wide receiver out of Ohio State, and the Jets made history. This is the first time in 21 years that they've taken a receiver in the first round, and Garrett ends up doing it. And, of course, I have to give a shout-out to a pretty cool nugget. He was one of several Ohio State or former Ohio State receivers that went bang, bang, bang in the draft. Of course, 10th was Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave to the New Orleans Saints, and then Jameson Williams to the Detroit Lions. That has to be pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to show what the amount of talent they had in that room. I mean, 2 years ago, that was the starting receiving core at Ohio State. You had Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jameson Williams. And the crazy thing is, Jackson Smith-Njigba, who replaced Jameson Williams last year, may end up getting drafted higher than all of them next year after he broke Ohio State's single-season records last year. So, yeah, Brian Hartline's got a really good thing going in that receiver room at Ohio State right now.
Yeah, it seems like a real first-world problem that's happening over there in Ohio State.
Sure.
So tell me a little bit about this guy. As we've been kind of learning about him, I hear the nickname G-Dub. That's interesting. But when I look at the size, 6 foot, 183 pounds, but I hear he's got like this basketball background, and I look back at the height and went, how is this even possible? He apparently had a couple Division I offers coming out of high school. So does he have some hops?
Yeah, he does. He absolutely does. He was, a very good basketball player in high school, but, certainly made the right decision going to football because, 6 feet, you're probably going to struggle to make it in the NBA, but NFL, he's a top 10 pick. And, I think the thing that, people really notice about Garrett, if you go back and watch his Ohio State film, is a lot of contested catches, a lot of examples of him, going up, high point in the football, winning those 50 balls. Even though he's not the biggest guy, he's a guy who uses his body really well, a guy who's really good at, extending out away from his body and making those tough catches. And then, he's also got, that 4.4 speed. He's also a guy who can, make people miss in space and is really smooth in space. So, I think he's a guy who's going to bring a really well-rounded skill set to New York. And certainly I think one of those things that he's going to bring is that ability to go up and make those tough catches, even if he's not that, 6'4" guy you might think of.
Yeah, right. When I think about the basketball star big guy, it's Drake London, of course, is the first guy that comes to mind in this draft class, who ended up going 8th overall to the Atlanta Falcons as well. What would you say is his calling card? You named a lot of different traits there that makes him very impressive, but if there was one thing that he kind of puts, rests his hat on, what would it be?
I think back to last year's game against Purdue when he scored 4 touchdowns in that game. And the thing that was striking about it when you went back and watched the 4 plays is he did them all in a little bit of a different way. There was one where it was like we were just talking about, where he goes up and he makes, a tough catch over a defender. There's another one where he gets the ball on a jet sweep and he runs, for a long touchdown. You're going to see other examples if you watch his film of him, taking a screen pass or a short pass and, making people miss in the open field. But he's also got that ability, to go deep and win the deep ball. And so I think his versatility is one thing that the Jets are really going to like about him. Is, I think he is a guy, I know he was asked last night, do you see yourself playing outside or inside? He said, I think I can play both. I think he can. He did that at Ohio State. He started out, as a slot receiver and was great there. And then they moved him outside and he was great there too. And so I think, however they want to utilize him with, Elijah Moore, Corey Davis, the other guys in their offense, I think he's going to be able to fit whatever role that they want him to be able to fit into.
Dan, that was going to be one of my questions because, as you mentioned, in 2020, slot guy. This past season, outside guy. So is there one that he's actually better at, or is he just this chess piece that could be moved all over the board?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't know that he's when you think of like your prototypical slot receiver, I don't know that he's that guy. Like, I think a lot of times when you think of a slot receiver, you think of like that guy who's like small, really shifty. Like, I think his profile is more that of a traditional, outside receiver, that X receiver position he played at Ohio State. But I think he has enough of that open field, make you miss ability. I think that's one thing. If you were comparing him with Chris Olave, that's an area where, why take Wilson over Olave? I think that's one area where he is better in terms of that being able to make people miss with the ball in his hands in open space. And so I think he has that to where, if you want to play him in the slot, I mean, he put up great numbers when he was a slot receiver 2 years ago. So I think, if you want to put him there in that role, he's certainly capable of it. My guess would be he's going to play mostly outside of the NFL, but I think, again, you look at a modern NFL offense, most of these guys, a Cooper Kupp, a Stephon Diggs, guys like that, they move them all around. And so I think, I know he's a guy, if you ask him, a couple guys that he has specifically mentioned in the past that he looks up to are Devontae Adams and Stephon Diggs. And those are guys that you see offenses move all around the place. So I think that's something he takes a lot of pride in, is being able to play every receiver spot and do a lot of different things.
Again, we're speaking with Dan Hope, deputy editor and lead Ohio State football beat writer for 11 Warriors here on the show. And guys, make sure you stop what you're doing and like the video, hit subscribe down below for more of this great content, and go support Dan Hope as well. Follow him on Twitter. He is a fantastic follow for all things the Ohio State. Got to make sure I get that in here on the show as well. And when we go back to that basketball background real quick that he had coming out of high school, do you see any of that on tape? Does any of that translate over in your mind?
I think it does. I think just in terms of that athleticism, the way he moves. I know, one thing that Ryan Day talks a lot is he likes two-sport athletes because he thinks, just the different things it teaches you, in terms of athleticism, in terms of, how you move out there on the field. He thinks it's really beneficial to somebody who plays that wide receiver position. So I think, you do see that in the sense of, he's a guy who's going to go up. He's going to go make those, maybe quote unquote, above the rim kind of plays where he's going to go up and, try to, catch the ball like he's making a rebound. And, I think also just that, again, that athleticism in space, that ability to move, those are things that a lot of times when you see guys that have that basketball background, that's something that you see is, they're really good athletes in space. So I think in those two areas, you see that basketball background that, came from his father being a great basketball player, and then him, being a very good high school basketball player as well.
I love that. All of this has sounded great for potential there with the Jets. Let's go to the size thing, because we just have to address that real quick. Again, he's 6 foot flat, but when you watch the tape, it seems like he plays so much bigger than what the size he's listed at.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Like, honestly, like, I never even thought of him as being like, oh, he's only 6 feet. Oh, he's only 185 or whatever, because he just doesn't play like that. Like, he does play like a guy who's bigger than that size. I think he probably plays bigger than other receivers Ohio State has had that actually were bigger, just because of his physicality, his play strength. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't see that as something that, Jets fans should be, concerned about. Could it show up more in the NFL than it did at Ohio State? Certainly. But, I mean, you're not talking about a guy who's, I mean, if you look at him, he's a well-built guy. So it's not somebody who's like overly thin or anything. And so I would be surprised if that's something that really holds him back in the NFL. Because again, if you look at a lot of the modern receivers in the NFL today, everybody loves the idea of that, the Randy Moss, the Terrell Owens kind of guy. But how many of the modern receivers in the NFL these days really are that 6'4", 6'5" guy? A lot of them are more of that, even outside guys. A lot of them are more of that 6'1", 6'2". And so I think he's, got enough size, again, maybe that's probably why Drake London went before him, because he is that bigger guy. But I don't really see that being anything that's going to hold Garrett back in the NFL.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, I mean, I guess we'll see ultimately how he kind of transitions over. In your mind, you kind of mentioned it, that sometimes he plays even bigger than some of the guys that were literally bigger than him as past Ohio State receivers. How does he compare? Obviously, Ohio State is a gosh darn factory, man. You guys are cranking out talent left and right. How does he compare to some of the best receivers that have come out over the last 2 decades or so?
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty special. I think he's certainly, in the years I've been covering Ohio State,
sure,
he's probably about, I'm talking guys that are already graduated. I mean, Jackson Smith-Njigba was right up there too, but just in terms of guys who have already completed their time for the program, he's about as talented, I think, as a receiver that I've seen, come through the program. I mean, you look at guys like Terry McLaurin and Michael Thomas; Those are
Right.
guys who have been better in the NFL than they were at Ohio State. Those guys never really put up huge numbers at Ohio State, and they've just gone on and gotten better and better at the next level. But Garrett's one of those guys. He's a 5-star recruit out of a high school. I mean, this is not unexpected. The fact that we're having this conversation 3 years later about him being a first-round NFL draft pick is not a surprise to anybody who's been following Garrett Wilson, because you watched him in high school. You could see he had this special talent. Immediately as a freshman, he comes in and he starts making an impact off the bench. And then the last 2 years, truly became one of Ohio State's biggest stars. And so, it just feels like everything's been building up to this moment. And, I don't think anybody's surprised to see that it ultimately resulted in this being a top 10 pick.
And I'm glad that you brought that up, because it's interesting, because, every year we get 5-star recruits that are coming out, but not everyone lives up to the hype. Not everyone lives up to the unreal, unbelievable billing. And I think it's even more important at Ohio State, where, again, as I mentioned, you guys are cranking out these guys left and right. I would imagine, I'm just kind of speculating here, that most of those guys don't live up to the hype that they're supposed to. So it's almost even more impressive that at a school like that, where it's big fish sure from where it came from, but big pond and big expectations from both the coaching staff, the fans, and of course, just in general, the conference of what you're able to bring to the table, though.
Yeah, and again, you mentioned it, the other receivers who were in that room. I mean, his whole career, he's surrounded by other guys who are now playing in the NFL. And so, he had to compete right away. He was going to get on the field. You do see that. You do see, there's other guys there right now who are 5-star recruits who are having to battle to try to climb that depth chart because of the talent they've built in that room. So the fact that he was able to just come in and do it, I think that speaks a lot. And I think the other thing, obviously, whenever a guy goes to New York, it. It's people always talk about, can he handle that spotlight? And I think one thing I would say about Garrett, of course, playing at one of the biggest spotlights in college football at Ohio State, is he always seemed extremely comfortable in the spotlight. Like, he was never a guy that anybody seemed to phase him. He's a guy that, just seemed very, very comfortable, in that spotlight, playing in, a big stadium with a rabid fan base, and, handling the expectations that come with that being a 5-star recruit. Some guys, that can be difficult, if people start, but the expectations are so high. Sometimes guys kind of struggle to deal with that mentally. With Garrett, he just always seemed just very calm, very cool, like nothing ever really bothered him. And so I think that's a quality that's going to serve him really well, especially going to a place like New York, where, I don't think the spotlight is going to be too big for him.
Okay, very interesting. All right, Dan, what's your expectation? Because sometimes it takes receivers a little bit, whether the football IQ may not be there, whether, in terms of just their own path and how long it takes to transition from the college game to the NFL. Do you anticipate him being a day one instant impact kind of starter, or is it going to take him some time to find himself in the pros?
I think he's certainly capable of that. Certainly, as you know, a lot of it has to do with the other Wilson. How quickly can he get on the same page with Zach Wilson? Can they get that Wilson to Wilson connection going right away? But I think he's certainly capable. I think the fact that he has been a 2-year starter at Ohio State, played a lot in all 3 of his years there. He's got that experience. He's played against a lot of high-level competition. He was practicing every day against NFL defensive backs. He was playing against a lot of NFL defensive backs. And so, I think he's a guy who's going to go in ready to compete for a starting job, ready to want to make an impact right away. It's always hard to quantify exactly what that's going to look like until the guy, starts going through camp, starts going through preseason, all that. But to me, if he's not playing and making at least some impact as a rookie, I would be very surprised.
All right, Dan, let me go to this quote from Dane Brugler, a great senior NFL draft analyst for The Athletic, and his beast. This was one of his quote in his scouting report for Garrett Wilson. He heard this from an NFL scout. Quote, Ohio State coaches said that Garrett Wilson carried himself with the demeanor and work ethic of a professional when he was a freshman. Is that something that you can agree with and concur with?
Yes, but I think they would also tell you that he was a lot better at that as a junior than he was when he was a freshman, because that was something that Ryan Day specifically made a point of multiple times this year, is that he felt Garrett really this year especially really got to that point of where he said, I want to be a pro, I want to train like a pro. And I do remember a couple times earlier in his career, coaches would make the point with Garrett of, we love what he's doing out there in the game, but we want to see that consistency. every day in practice. And so, I think they were always very happy with Garrett. I think early in his career, but maybe there were times where they wanted to see a little bit more out of him just in terms of how he practiced. But I think by the time you got to last year, when he's a junior, third year in the program, I think he was one of the hardest workers on the team, one of the best practice players on the team. And they always consistently talked about how, he, along with Chris Olave, set the example in that room for the other receivers to follow.
Dan, before we get you out of here, give it to us straight. Jet fans that are listening in and learning so much about him. So again, thank you so much for your time and giving this cool insight and behind the scenes. What is his ceiling? What do you believe in the best possible, even I guess somewhat optimistic way, but not unrealistic? What do you believe his ceiling is in the NFL?
Man, I think it's really high. Everything I said, I think he's got a great skill set. I think he's got a great head on his shoulders to where he's really going to go in and want to maximize that skill set. And so, to me, I think, if we're talking about a future Pro Bowl receiver here, I think that's, very well within the realm of possibility that he's a guy that can go on and be an elite receiver in the NFL, and a guy who in 3 years you're talking about giving that $20+ million contract to. So we'll see if that all comes to fruition. But, I think he's got that kind of talent. And I think, anybody you talk to from Ohio State would probably agree with that.
Dan, I am going to clip that and put that on Twitter, and that is going to get 3 million views. There's no question about it. When they hear Pro Bowl, elite, and hell, even the thought of, wait, we have someone worthy of paying that kind of money to? Phenomenal. So for the Jets, again, this is such a big pick. Like I said, 21 years since the last time the Jets invested a first-round draft choice into a wide receiver, and a lot of people believe that Garrett Wilson was wide receiver 1, even though he didn't go, quote unquote, as wide receiver 1 with Drake London going to the Atlanta Falcons. Well, Dan, I got to thank you so much for taking the time. It's going to be a fun series, talking to a lot of cool insiders across the United States with all these picks that the Jets are going to cash in. Thank you so much for taking the time, Dan. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, sure thing. Happy to do it.